Welcome to the weekend. I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute and your devil's advocate. Tonight on topic, middle-aged white guys fighting back the paunch and gray hair. From the Denver Post, Dan Haley, editorial.
Plenty of paunch and gray hair now.
Yeah, and getting a tip from PBS, Mr. Rogers' wardrobe. From Channel 9 News is Adam Schrager. Thank you for being here.
I love the sweater vest. You got a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
you look comfy. We dressed up for the show.
So tell me, how are the grandkids this time of year?
I got a bowl of soup when I got this too. So.
All right, I wanted to take a look at. Would you agree this was probably the weirdest political year you've ever seen? Now that you guys are so much older than you've ever been, every year you say this was a weird political year, but this was a bizarre political year.
This is a political year where you have the sitting governor deciding not to run for re-election, which hasn't happened in I don't know how many years. Maybe Adam knows. It had been 50 or 60 years since we had turned the governor out, so it's been a long time since one decided not to run. You had a major Senate race with a candidate that most of Colorado didn't know a year ago, meaning Ken Buck beating out Jane Norton. And then you had this Tea Party movement, which few people saw coming a couple years ago, which swept across the country and made changes across the country. It was a strange year. And I forget the governor's race. When you take Ritter out and you have McGinnis, who everybody assumes is going to be the Republican nominee, and all hell breaks loose on that side, and I've never seen anything like it. I talked to Fred Brown, who's been with the Denver Post for 50 years. Is that right? 40 years?
Yeah.
50 years, early 1960s. Never seen anything like it either.
The axiom that works for me is whatever the conventional wisdom is in politics, it's wrong. And this year proved it. Other than Channel 9 making gobs of money and the most disgusting ads I've ever seen, what was the biggest surprise for you?
In many ways, I shouldn't have been surprised, and yet I was that the Republican wave didn't really take hold in Colorado. I think we got a little wet, but it didn't drown top to bottom the races like I think it happened everywhere else in the country. And in many ways, that'll be the storyline is why didn't it happen here in Colorado? Why was John Hickenlooper able to end up probably the most successful politician at the end of the day in the state of Colorado? Why was Michael Bennet able to win a race that by all accounts
he should have lost? He
should have lost. That to me is kind of the overriding storyline, because I mean, you know this, John, as a Republican. I mean, people were predicting. I mean, the kind of change that you just see once in every, I mean, even older than we are, once every 50 years.
The Caldera's political axiom, there's nothing that Republicans can't screw up. Proven again so well this year, but the difference being that on a generic ballot, Republicans were going to kick ass. There was no question about it. We had a 9-point lead in the governor's race on the generic ballot. And let me say that watching the state treasurer and the state secretary of state go Republican on this year, I think it's proof that the generic ballot was probably true.
I was just going to say, let's not underestimate the gains the Republicans did make in Colorado. Now, certainly they weren't, 17 state houses flipped across the country. Didn't necessarily happen here the way some Republicans had intended, but Republicans picked up 2 congressional seats, which is huge in any year. Picked up the Secretary of State, the Treasurer. You had an anomaly, really strange races for Senate and governor. And then you had sort of the down ticket stuff where Republicans did fairly well, took back the House by just 1 vote. But what Adam is being too nice and not saying here is he's actually making a pitch for his book, which spells out why this happened in Colorado, why Colorado stands out. Now, there's 2 strange races that are separate, but there's an infrastructure that the left has built over the last now 4 election cycles, which allows for them to make gains in good years and hold back the drive in bad years.
And if Republicans were smart, they would have realized that, probably by the second season that Democrats pulled it.
2006, they would have figured something out.
But no, in 2008, they get their clocks cleaned again. And I'm thinking, well, now Republican funders will understand it. And so they get bludgeoned again. Name the book, The Blueprint, by the way.
I mean, if you think about it, the Democrats knew all along that this was going to be a year about defeating Republicans and not about electing Democrats. And so the goal was to make every race as truly local about that individual Republican candidate. And you saw it from the big ticket races all the way way down to the local races, you know, where Dan and his wife in Jeff go, and me and my wife in Arapahoe County as unaffiliated voters.
Yes, we get it. You're both heterosexual. I understand that. Congratulations.
We are getting nonstop mailers just, you know, about how bad the Republican candidate is. Not necessarily even speaking about the Democratic candidate, just demonizing one side, which I had to make the demon.
I tell you what, let's try to take one at a time. Let's do the United States Senate race. You watched what we did a show like this about a year ago. Both of you guys were here,
yeah.
and we got it all right, didn't we? We predicted everything that was going to happen in the next year.
United States Senate race, we were very concerned about what was going to happen when Michael Bennet took on Jane Norton. And as we all know, Jane Norton didn't make it through the primary this year. We did talk about Andrew Romanoff challenging Michael Bennet, and I think we all pretty much assumed that Michael Bennet would win that race because he would have more money, and sure enough, he did, and ended up, you know, running against Ken Buck, a guy that none of us really saw coming. The conventional wisdom was Jane Norton was going to come in, suck all the money and air out of the room, and
what amazes me though is you watch the show again just the other day, which means you must have videotaped it and kept it, didn't you?
No, actually, it's on YouTube. Yeah. There's something called the internet, John, which the Republicans really need to figure out if they want to make gains in the election. There's a whole other thing going on out here.
Listen, so the talkies are not going to last. They're not going to last.
The internet runs the show.
I can understand why Jane Norton lost, given the Tea Party sentiment. I mean, this was a Tea Party year, but I look around the country, here in Colorado, Ken Buck, Sharon Engel, Christine O'Donnell, those are 3 seats Republicans would have won if the Tea Party candidate didn't win in the general.
Yeah,
or in the primary.
And we were talking before we started, and I think we all agree that Jane Norton would have beaten Michael Bennet, and it probably wouldn't have been as close. I mean, Ken Buck made she wouldn't have made the high heel comment. Right. You know, in many ways, I don't think he quite was prepared for the onslaught that happened. I mean, if you think about it, he got hit by the environmental community on the West Slope for supporting Ref A. He got hit by the choice folks here in the metro area for supporting the ballot, the personhood amendment. He got hit by the teachers union for talking about the Department of Education. He got hit by the trial lawyers for ethics problems at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I mean, and yet the similar tagline to all of it was Ken Buck is too extreme for Colorado. There was a coordinated effort that they never quite understood, A, or B, had the resources to marshal against it.
But also, as you guys are trying to triumph your heterosexuality, the case point when it was on, was it Faceless Nation? Was that the, whatever?
Meet the Press?
Yeah, Meet the Press, thank you. And he stumbled, all right? He stumbled. It wasn't awful, but he stumbled. But it took him a week to even respond to it.
Exactly. Part of it is the recovery time and having a rapid response. He's asked a question about being gay, and he kind of gives 2 answers to it, and then he takes this next step into alcoholism, and it's just a bad answer. A quicker candidate, somebody who's more experienced, who had run for something besides Weld County DA in the past, would have turned that question back on David Gregory and made him look foolish for even asking it, that sort of thing.
All he had to say, Dan, was, you know, I don't, and the question was, you know, is being homosexual a choice? All he had to say is, I'm not a scientist, but under Colorado law, everybody is afforded equal protection, which is why I was the first district attorney in the country to prosecute the Angie Zapata case for a transgender young woman. She deserved just as many rights as anybody else. And then it's not only not a negative, it turns it into a positive. But even if stop the conversation.
As a guy who's made a living putting my foot in my mouth, the making the mistake is fine. It's the apology afterwards. If, you know, 2 hours afterwards, he was there with a representative from the Log Cabin Republicans, the gay Republican group, saying, and they made that comment, it would have blown over more quickly.
He was undone by his own words and his ability to, lack of ability to respond to them. Remember the rape case that came up, and he said there was this, you know, what was the phrase?
Buyer's remorse.
Buyer's remorse, right? Probably could have chosen better words, but in the context, they weren't that bad, yet he had trouble defending it. And it was one of those cases where you see this whole infrastructure, again, that the left has built that creates. Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's interesting you talk about it. It's the first election cycle we've seen, too, where video has dominated it. No longer is it just the quote from the, I mean, now you have video. The Bennett campaign office, if you all went there, had data files of every single Ken Buck appearance, every Jane Norton appearance, frankly, for months beforehand. And all they had to do was, you know, bing, 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 and they could plop it up and send it out and make it viral. The
best investment the Democrats made in that campaign was whoever they paid to follow around Ken Buck with a tape recorder. That's all it was. And he was a nice guy, and Ken Buck would say hi to him. That that money was well spent. Republicans, we don't do that way.
But if you have a more disciplined candidate, a Jane Norton would look back at 2008 and say the personhood